This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. New theories and new mysteries cropped up today in the investigation of last Sunday's British airliner crash. This much is known. One of the engines was on fire when the Boeing 737 went down, killing 44 people. The other engine, for some reason, was turned off. Both Britain and the United States began emergency inspections of the U.S.-built planes. Correspondent Tom Fenton begins our report from London.
The British government ordered the grounding of all late-model Boeing 737s until urgent safety checks can be made, as suspicion shifted tonight from pilot error to equipment problems. Investigators at first suspected it was the pilot who made a fatal error when he shut down the wrong engine. They changed their minds today after questioning Captain Kevin Hunt in the hospital for 45 minutes. Investigators now suspect the cockpit alarm system was faulty and that warning lights may have indicated a fire in the right-hand engine when it was the left engine on fire.
It has been known to have happened on several different types of aircraft previously.
One of the survivors today raised another possibility that the pilot may have been right when he believed both engines were malfunctioning. This passenger said he heard strange noises coming first from one engine and then the other.
What actually happened then was there was a lot of noise out of the other engine, and at that point it sounded as if the other engine was doing what the first engine had done.
Survivors got a chance to tell more of their stories today when Prince Charles visited one of the hospitals. A young man who lost 3 close relatives was sadly philosophical.
That's the way life goes, isn't it?
A woman who thought her husband was dead until he finally spoke to her was asked what his first words were.
Get off my leg.
Near the scene of the crash, there was both mourning and Thanksgiving today. Relatives of the dead were taken there and prayed for those they lost. But people who live under the airport's final approach path said prayers of thanks that Captain Hunt's skill in maneuvering the stricken plane spared their village and their lives. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
There are 300 Boeing 737s in service in this country with the same type of engine that failed in the British crash. Tonight, the Federal Aviation Administration issued a directive requiring an emergency inspection of the fire and vibration warning systems on the 737s. They're looking particularly for the cross-wiring that is suspected in the Kegworth accident. These are new planes, but sometimes newness is the problem.
When an aircraft is first introduced, it's much like a new car. If you're going to have some mechanical problems, it will happen early in the airplane's history.
Boeing says all the engine warning systems are tested before its planes are delivered. The instruments on the British plane should have indicated any fire.
There's a critical issue here, and that is whether or not there actually was a fire warning audible in the cockpit. It would be a loud bell.
The engines used on these Boeing 737s do not have a particularly bad safety record, but there have been several failures in the past 5 years. A Boeing from TACA Airlines had both engines stop in flight on an approach to New Orleans last May. It managed to land on a levee beside the Mississippi. The same type of engine stopped in midair on a United Airlines flight leaving Chicago in 1983, on a Delta flight out of West Palm Beach, Florida in 1985, and last July, Continental had an engine stop while over Wilmington, Delaware. The British crash has again raised the long-simmering issue of whether having just 2 pilots on the flight deck is enough in an emergency. The Boeings and other new aircraft use computers to do what the flight engineer, the third man in the cockpit, used to do: check that everything's working.
In a tight situation where a computer can't see, it can't hear, if someone were to turn off the fuel, it doesn't care. The computer doesn't care.
The U.S. airlines must now check their 737s within the next 72 hours. But the FAA has not yet followed the second British recommendation, that the fire and vibration warning systems on these planes be checked more frequently throughout the aircraft's life. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
Follow-up tonight to the story that CBS News Defense Department correspondent David Martin and reporter-producer Howard Rosenberg first broke on the CBS Evening News last night. The story that the top-secret nose cone of a U.S. nuclear missile is missing, and the Soviets may have stolen it. Martin reported on circumstantial but increasing evidence the Soviets may have violated waters off the Marshall Islands to retrieve the nose cone from a U.S. missile test-fired into the South Pacific in 1987. In Moscow, Soviet Foreign Ministry spokesman Gennady Gerasimov was asked about this today.
The recorder has disappeared, and there is speculation that, among other things, it may have been taken or acquired somehow by the Soviets, perhaps even using a mini submarine.
Yes, I heard that news, and I checked the news with our central information agency. They said they couldn't find anything in the lost and found.
U.S. Pentagon officials say they haven't ruled out possibly other culprits besides the Soviets. They cling to the possibility, as they put it, that the nose cone debris may have been retrieved by U.S. military divers and somehow got misplaced in the mail. Still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News. Jerry Bowen on the big comeback for Clickety-Clack as a way to get there. And Susan Spencer on where we were and where we are in the campaign against cigarette smoking.
Smoother, milder, tastier, old soul.
CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver reports on both sides of this question of life or death.
Rossi Mosley has not forgotten one detail, one cruel memory of what Johnny Paul Penry did to her daughter Pam Carpenter in Livingston, Texas 9 years ago.
He drug her into the bedroom, and that's where he beat her and raped her and just left bruises all on her neck where he stomped her kidneys so bad that she ruptured. That's what killed her.
When Johnny Penry broke into Pam Carpenter's house that day, he had just been paroled for another rape and had a long record of violent behavior. He had also been intensely abused himself, raped and beaten in state reform schools, brutalized even before that.
My mom wouldn't feed me, wouldn't give me no water. She made me eat my own wayside, drink my own urine.
The jury that convicted Penry knew that, but ruled that he acted deliberately, thereby sentencing him to death under Texas law. The jurors also knew that he is severely retarded, with the mental ability of a 6 or 7 year old, the social maturity of an 8 to 10 year old.
Do you know that it's wrong to kill someone?
That's what I had been told that it was. I don't know.
Today, Penry's lawyer asked the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down the death sentence on the grounds that it is cruel and unusual punishment to execute someone who is retarded.
A mentally retarded person just doesn't fully understand what he's doing and the consequences of it.
In today's court session, several justices wondered about the difficulty of determining what level of retardation would exempt someone from the death penalty. The attorney for Texas said what really matters is that the jury believes the accused knows the difference between right and wrong.
The fact that his IQ falls on one side of a cutoff point instead of another, I don't think is really an equitable way to approach the situation.
Did he give up his right to live in killing your daughter?
Sure, he should give up his right to live. It's hard for people to understand till they have a daughter that's, been murdered this way.
What would be fair to happen to you?
Give me a life sentence where I can have some place where I can get some help.
Those who want to see Penry executed and those who don't agree on this, that with his history of violence and mental retardation, he should never have been allowed to live unsupervised.
The question now, given Penry's disability, what punishment should fit his crime? Rita Braver, CBS News at the Texas State Prison in Huntsville.
The U.S. Supreme Court handed consumers a big victory today and a setback to the nation's troubled nuclear power industry. The justices ruled 8-1 that Pennsylvania utilities could not bill customers to make up the costs of 4 abandoned nuclear power plants. Long-distance buses from Brownsville, Texas were packed today with Central American immigrants, freed by a federal judge's order to seek asylum anywhere in the United States. Most of them headed for Miami, but as Victoria Corderia reports, their troubles didn't end there.
Right now, almost 300 Nicaraguan refugees are housed in a baseball stadium, along with almost 200 of Miami's homeless. And hundreds of Nicaraguan refugees are heading from Texas to Miami. A judge's order on Monday allowed the Nicaraguans to leave the border town of Brownsville. Complaining of cold weather in Texas, many immediately headed for Florida, trying to get there however they could. Carmen Castro and her son were among the first to arrive in Miami. She says all of the refugees in Texas and those still waiting to flee Nicaragua talk only of Miami. The Nicaraguans arriving here are glad to be in a warmer climate, but are stunned at the cool reception they're getting. Miami officials say the city simply cannot afford another wave of refugees.
We're not in the housing business. We can't feed and clothe these people indefinitely. And if we don't get some assistance from the federal government, we just can't handle it.
The city is not allowing any more into the shelter.
We're also closing the gate down there.
Many who have been languishing there for weeks are getting angry. No one ever told us it was going to be so difficult here, says Marby Matamoros, who has been waiting a month for permission to work. The established Nicaraguan community in Miami is helping privately, but it too is overwhelmed.
The private sector of Miami, I think, can assimilate the majority of these Nicaraguans who are coming in. It has, for years. But now the flow is just too large.
The refugees in the stadium must be cleared out by the end of the month when baseball spring training begins. Carmen Castro and hundreds of others who will be arriving here in the next few days think they will have a place to stay temporarily as they start life in their dream city. All of them, say Miami officials, are in for a tough beginning. Victoria Corderi, CBS News, Miami.
Thousands of Mexican oil workers walked off their jobs today protesting the arrest of their union leader. Some refineries were crippled and panicky motorists lined up for hours to stock up on gasoline. 66-year-old union leader Joaquin Hernandez Galicia was seized in a raid yesterday and charged with smuggling and gun running. This was seen as a move by the new Mexican government to break the power of the allegedly corrupt union over the once allegedly corrupt state-owned oil industry.
You know, the other day my MCI rep called me up. Says he'd like to stop by with some new ideas. I think my long distance gets complicated again. Then he shows me how I've outgrown my current MCI service. And with a couple of changes,
the United States vetoed a resolution that would have condemned the U.S. for shooting down 2 Libyan jets last week in the Mediterranean. The vote in the Security Council was 9 in favor, 4 against, but the U.S. veto killed the whole resolution. Earlier today, in what could be seen as a take down the heat move toward Libya, U.S. diplomats said the U.S. military has canceled plans now to hold aerial maneuvers near Libya next week. Delegates from nearly every nation in the world agreed today in Paris to condemn the use of chemical weapons and work with renewed vigor to eliminate them. After 5 years of hot debate, I should say after 5 days of hot debate, conference leaders stayed up all night negotiating the final statement. Wyatt Andrews reports on the windup.
In a simple conclusion, 149 countries have promised not to use chemical weapons ever again. But the 6-paragraph final communique does not mention any penalty for breaking that promise. Iraq, which used chemical weapons, is not mentioned by name. There's not a word on Gaddafi's chemical factory, and there's no condemnation of countries or companies which spread chemical weapons technology. Yet with all those weaknesses, almost every nation here proclaimed an achievement.
We believe that we've made an important step.
The world wants to eliminate chemical weapons threat.
Those who defend the Paris conference say what they've accomplished is a new moral basis for opposing chemical war. In fact, the new worldwide attention that's now focused on the chemical problem has apparently put pressure on one government already, West Germany's. After first denying that any proof linked Germany to the Libyan plant, the West German government now says criminal charges might be filed. Stern magazine reports 3 firms are now under investigation for supplying parts to Gaddafi. 2 of the 3 companies had been cleared by the government last week. The question back in Paris, meanwhile, is why this conference on chemical weapons wasn't any tougher. The Americans had called for penalties against those who used chemical weapons, but compromised to avoid a veto from Iraq.
If the United States wrote this statement, which it did not, the language might have been stronger.
At its worst, many diplomats agree the Paris document could become just another toothless international agreement. But at best, the communique might reverse the trend in which chemical weapons have become acceptable. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Paris.
Israeli warplanes struck targets in Lebanon today for the first time in 1989. The Israeli army said the raid was aimed at the Palestinian terror group headed by Abu Nidal. There was no word on casualties.
Taking home whole wheat total?
Special K.
Hope you're hungry, because you'll need almost 3 boxes to equal the vitamin and mineral nutrition in just 1 box of total.
It's money well spent. Jerry Bowen has been investigating.
Amtrak San Diegan makes its spectacular run along the California coast on a longer track these days, going beyond Los Angeles all the way to Santa Barbara. Outside of the busy Boston-Washington corridor, it's the most popular train route in America. Popular and almost paying for itself, due in part to increased use by commuters. In fact, the clickety-clack is making a big comeback up the coast and across the country. All kinds of passenger trains are in again.
The largest increase in traffic has been commuters, and those are people that we were told wouldn't get out of their cars.
The rail renaissance began with the San Diego trolley in 1981, a 16-mile route to Tijuana that started with slightly more riders. The Reagan administration has been skeptical, too. Federal funds were cut by 1/3 in the president's second term, Mr. Reagan arguing the dollars were misspent.
In Miami, the $1 billion subsidy helped build a system that serves less than 10,000 daily riders. That comes to $100,000 a passenger. It would have been a lot cheaper to buy everyone a limousine.
Miami ridership has nearly quadrupled in the 4 years since that criticism, but is still far from what planners had forecast. Dallas voters had such doubts about a planned $3 billion rail system for their sprawling city, they turned down plans to borrow 1/3 of the funding.
What will the cost be for taking each automobile off the road? Is it worth $500,000 per car, for example, to take a vehicle off the road?
But the big move in America is toward the rails, not away. And eventually, say the planners, time will prove them right. It took time, they argue, for Americans to leave the old trolley for the car. It will take time to get them back on board. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And I don't want anyone driving my XT while I'm away. You understand.
The Subaru XT6 has a powerful 6-cylinder engine, computerized full-time 4-wheel drive, and a design which makes it hard to resist.
Somebody drove my car. Who was it?
The Subaru XT6, Sport Magazine's Super Bowl MVP award.
It took 2,000 years, but a revolutionary discovery is changing the way men think about coloring their gray hair. It's called Just for Men, from the leader in men's hair coloring. Simply apply Just for Men, and in 5 minutes, shampoo out. Your gray is blended away, leaving your natural-looking color. 5 minutes. Here, look at me. Just for Men leaves your hair looking healthy and fuller, and it won't fade or wash out. Just for Men, in the men's hair care section.
If you're looking for Oat Brand, all oatmeal is not created equal. 1 serving of total oatmeal has 10 times the nutrition of old-fashioned Quaker oats. And now, more Oat Brand, too. Total oatmeal, more Oat Brand, total nutrition.
The next time you have a glass of orange juice, tomato, or grapefruit, think about this. You get more of 7 important vitamins and minerals in a glass of great-tasting Sunsweet prune juice. Sunsweet. Here's to your health.
A U.S. Labor Department survey out today says 12% of job seekers screened for drug use by potential employers last year tested positive. The survey also found that 1 out of 100 Americans was subjected to a drug test in the workplace last year, far fewer than previously thought. 25 years ago today, the Surgeon General issued the U.S. government's first warning on cigarette smoking and disease. It's difficult to remember how pervasive cigarettes were in American life then. But even as the smoke clears, smoking is responsible for more than 1 of every 6 deaths in this nation. And if health officials find much to celebrate, and they do, about warnings to the public, they also find much to worry about. CBS News medical correspondent Susan Spencer reports.
The gains we have made in curtailing the use of cigarettes in the United States represent one of the greatest public health achievements of all time.
And yet, America's push to kick the habit started with such a simple announcement.
It is a judgment of the committee that cigarette smoking contributes substantially to mortality from certain specific diseases and to the overall death rate.
A remarkable statement at a time when cigarette packs were merely tap dancing on television.
Winston tastes good.
When even the Flintstones smoked. When health claims were made for cigarettes.
Did you say I'll feel better smoking, Philip Morris?
Yes, you'll feel better. And here are the reasons why. In case after case, coughs due to smoking disappear.
But within a few years of the Surgeon General's first report, the commercials had disappeared. Print ads remain with the required warnings, but at least one ad recently has backfired. Meet David Gerlitz, rugged, good-looking, a former Winston man, now working for the American Cancer Society.
I was used to glamorize cigarette smoking, and it's a lie. If I've been influential in any way in starting you smoking, whether you're 12 or 20, please accept my apology.
As the country's 50 million smokers well know, the message everywhere today is put it out. On airplanes, at work, in restaurants, and the tobacco industry is crying foul, demanding in its new ads that the assault end. Not likely.
2/3 of this population is assaulted by the 1/3 that smokes, and that assault can be lethal.
In its own new anti-smoking messages, the government is using a carrot instead of a stick.
Even if you've tried before, they'll help you try again.
Despite the gains of the last quarter century, predictions are that 22% of Americans still will smoke in the year 2000. To steal a phrase, we have come a long way, baby, but we've still got a long way to go. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the CBS Evening News until our live coverage of President Reagan's speech to the nation tonight at 9 Eastern Time. Dan Rather. See you then.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow morning, Reagan joins us on her father's farewell address in the Reagan presidency.
Also, Tony Bennett on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.